So this little poem here is attributed to Jack London. After God had finished the rattlesnake, the toad, and the vampire, he had some awful substance left with which he made a scab. Now, a scab is a two-legged animal with a corkscrew soul, a water brain, a combination backbone of jelly and glue. Where others have hearts, he carries a tumor of rotten principles. When a scab comes down the street, men turn their backs and angels weep in heaven, and the devil shuts the gates of hell to keep them out. Now that's attributed to Jack London. I'm reading this because I had heard that Jack London had killed himself when he was 40 years old. That's not exactly the case, and I'll mention something about that here in a second. But they're saying it's attributed to him. But they're saying it's not exactly his style of writing, and it's not. Here's something else that he had wrote. He published a 1903 speech titled The Scab, and it gives a more balanced view of the topic. In the War of the Classes. The laborer who gives more time or strength or skill for the same wage than another equal time or strength or skill for a less wage is a scab. The generousness on his part is hurtful to his fellow laborers, for it compels them to an equal generousness which is not to their liking, and which gives them less food and shelter. But a word may be said for the scab. Just as his act makes his rivals compulsorily generous, so do they, by fortune of birth and training, make compulsory his act of generousness. Nobody desires to scab, to give the most for least. The ambition of every individual is quite the opposite, to give the least for most, and as a result, living in a tooth and nail society, battle royale is waged by the ambitious individuals, but in its most salient aspect, that of the struggle over the division of the joint product, it is no longer a battle between individuals, but between groups of individuals. Capital and labor apply themselves to raw material, make something useful out of it, add it to its value, and then proceed to quarrel over the division of the added value. Neither cares to give most for least. Each is intent on giving less than the other and on receiving more. The most for least, I always kind of look down at a scab because, you got this organization, these group of working folks that are striking, unionizing, saying, hey, we want, better wages, better working conditions. Then you got this asshole over here who's, maybe he's destitute and desperate, and he's like, you know what? I know a lot of people aren't going to like me for doing this, crosses the picket line, and then does a bunch of work for, a little. And so in a way, this kind of says that a scab gives the most for the least. And there is something to be said about that. And then I also like what he says right here, where he says capital and labor apply themselves to raw material, make something useful out of the raw material, right? Both capital and labor apply themselves to the raw material, make something useful out of the raw material, they add to its value, and then they proceed to quarrel over the division of the added value. No, I gave more. No, I gave more. I gave more, so therefore I deserve more of the profit. Neither cares to give most for least. Each is intent on giving less than the other and on receiving more. Last thing I'm going to mention, I'll mention it in a second, actually.